So hi, this is going to be my first video on YouTube, not online, there was one other online, but my first on YouTube, and it's about the airplane on a conveyor belt problem, because this was just recently discussed by the Mythbusters. It's now February 1st, they did it on late January sometime. I have seen bad arguments on both sides of the issue on this one. And really, I think the problem comes about because there are two ways to understand the fundamental problem being posed in the airplane on a conveyor belt story. One of them is very intuitively, in fact logically, extended so that the airplane does not take off. And the other one is not just that the airplane can take off, but that a car could drive straight off without any effort at all if it really wanted to. So I'm going to try to treat both of those two problems to show why they aren't the same problem. And I think I'll start with the one where the airplane can take off, because that's the one which most people are familiar with. This is the most common version of the airplane on a conveyor belt problem. You have a conveyor belt with wheels, and you can set it to whatever speed you want to. On top of it is a vehicle. In this case, I'm just going to draw a car, because it's going to strike a lot of people as odd that I have said that you can actually drive a car off of this sort of conveyor belt. But this is the most common version of the problem, and in fact you can. The car is moving forward with some velocity, which I'll call v. If you don't know much physics, I went to an Ivy League school, Cornell. I didn't receive my bachelor's degree because I'm on a medical leave of absence right now. So I can't claim that I have a bachelor's, but in terms of mechanics, I know as much as someone who has a bachelor's degree at this point. And I've got something like one more year to go to complete that on topics that are much more interesting. But if you don't know much physics, like I was saying, a velocity is a speed plus some sense of direction. In this case, I'm going to use negative numbers to indicate when something is going that way, and positive numbers when it's going that way. And all other directions I'm just not worrying about right now. So if you don't know physics, velocity is the exact same thing as speed, except we use negative numbers, a negative sign, to say that you're moving backwards. The conveyor belt is moving with a backwards velocity, u. Like I said, this is a conveyor belt. You've got a motor on it. You can set u to be whatever you want it to be. You set v via the car's engine, to be whatever you want it to be. And I'm measuring v with respect to the ground. Okay? V is the speed with respect to the ground, not with respect to the conveyor belt. The way that this is normally phrased is you have a speed camera, which I'll draw like that, and the speed camera figures out what v is by just detecting what speed this thing is going relative to the ground, and then follows the procedure, the algorithm, the set of steps, the recipe. It says set u equal to v. I'm going to write 3 for some reason. Set u equal to v, and that is how it works. So it is commonly believed that this will stop a car. In fact, it will not. There is nothing logically inconsistent about moving forward with respect to the ground. Since the speed camera is on the ground, it measures your speed relative to the speed of the ground. There's nothing wrong with something moving forward relative to the ground. If I'm in a car that's moving relative to the ground at, say, 30 miles an hour, right? V is plus 30 miles per hour. All that this says is that u is negative 30 miles per hour, and my odometer will say that I'm actually going 60 miles an hour, because my odometer doesn't really know what the hell it's talking about. When I look outside the window, I will see myself moving at 30 miles an hour relative to the ground. This is how this is normally phrased. I just want to get that out there, because someone who says that the plane doesn't take off is going to say that this somehow misrepresents the problem. No, it doesn't. The speed camera is generally always placed just on the ground, measuring your speed relative to the ground. So there is only one little thing that could be wrong with a plane trying to take off from this sort of contraption. That is that if a plane's wheels can't handle running at twice the speed that they take off from. And in the Mythbusters, this didn't happen. The plane's wheels were perfectly fine with running extra quickly. If your plane's wheels can't handle that, then your plane's wheels will break. And that would be a problem with this, with the whole situation. But as long as your plane's wheels don't break, there's nothing wrong with a plane accelerating itself to take off velocity. Just like there is nothing wrong with me driving forward relative to the ground 30 miles an hour. So that's the normal way that this is phrased. I feel like that's kind of lame as a phrasing, but that's how people normally phrase it. Okay, so that's one scenario where I've argued, I guess mostly by shouting at you, that there's nothing wrong with a car driving off of this particular conveyor belt. And that is how it's mostly phrased. As a matter of fact, for most of the time, they don't tell you the physics nerdy details, because usually it's not a physics nerd who's presenting it, so they don't tell you what V is being measured with respect to. I've defined it as being measured with respect to the ground. They don't tell you quite where the speed camera is, but it's clear that there's only one of them and that it doesn't seem to be moving so much. So at least that's what it sounds like to me. So this is the first scenario. I think I'll cover 3 actually, because in keeping with this Mythbusters idea of figuring out what it would take to stop a car, what it would take to stop a plane as well, it's worth thinking about how we would stop a car. If we're going to stop a plane, I hope that whatever method we use will stop a car. One example, which I don't mean seriously, is to put it all in a vacuum tube. If your conveyor belt is in a vacuum tube, there's no air for the airplane to push on. There's no air for an engine to run on. You just can't do much with it. So there's that. You can place it in a vacuum tube. What I'm going to talk about is instead making the entire thing frictionless. I don't know where to begin with this. It certainly stops a car. I mean, not really. The belt still has a certain mass, and so if you try to just go until your odometer reads, like, say, 80 miles an hour, you're pushing backward on this conveyor belt, on this piece of mass, this stuff. And by Newton's, I believe it's the 3rd law, it pushes back on you, right? So you should be able to get a little bit of speed relative. But for all intents and purposes, you're dead in the water.